Hi, this is Prado, and I'm gonna try something new today. So I host a podcast called A Bit of Both with one of my friends, and there we just discuss random stuff. So I was cooking the other day, and my friend suggested that I should maybe do a podcast about cooking. And I know food is a very intensely like a visual thing as well as like a flavor thing, and you can neither see nor smell or taste your food through a podcast, but I'm gonna try to make it a decent experience for all of you. So yeah, so for the first episode, we're gonna make some cookies. And now the thing is that I really love chocolate, and I would love to make amazing chocolate chip cookies, but it's very difficult to come by chocolate chips or even like a baking compound of chocolate. So I'm just gonna use cocoa powder because it's fairly easy to use. This is like a recipe for really like moist and soft chocolate cookies. And they're really good because they remind me of the big cookies that you get at Subway, and they're really moist, they're really like decadent and really indulgent, and they're quite sweet. So they're like a really cool chocolate experience. So the first thing that we're gonna do is we're gonna use a big bowl and we're gonna put some flour in it, about 1 cup. So the weird thing is that I actually use actual cups to measure things when I'm in the kitchen. So I actually get a cup out, and this is not just for things like desserts where you need to be more particular with your amounts, but I do this even for pasta and for Maggie, for like instant cook noodles and things like that, which they say you need to put 1.5 cups, and I still don't eyeball it. I've been making those for like over 10 years, and I still measure water out with proper cups. So yeah, the first thing is we're going to use a cup of flour. That's our flour. Then we're gonna put some cocoa powder, so about half a cup of cocoa powder. Again, we're gonna measure in the cup. And yeah, it's a decent amount of cocoa powder. It's a fairly big amount of all of these things. So yeah, that's half a cup of cocoa powder. Smells quite nice. So ideally you would want to sift it, but I'm not gonna go to those lengths because I actually like small, like if it's not completely properly mixed, it gives it like a very nice texture, and I really find it quite nice. With most things, I tend to find it tastier if it's more rustic, if it has some minor lumps here and there. I'm just looking for my whisk. Since I can't find my whisk, we're just gonna use a fork because, I mean, the utensils that you use, the tools that you use, they're just tools, right? So, I mean, you could do all of this by hand if you wanted to, but I'm gonna use a fork because I do have forks at my disposal. The only thing is to really mix it really well. So yeah, it's looking good. Takes a little bit longer, but actually does the job perfectly well. So what we've done is we've put the flour, we've put the cocoa powder, and now we're going to put some baking soda. So you don't really need a lot of baking soda, you need like really tiny amounts whenever you're using them. So there's one more thing. Baking soda and baking powder are not the same thing. Like baking soda is it's a soda. It's sodium bicarbonate. So it needs another acidic element to get things started, to actually help you bake your things. So you need usually, sometimes they use buttermilk, sometimes they use lemon juice or something of that sort to make sure that the reaction takes place and you get the right thing. But baking powder is something that you can use just off the shelf. I actually prefer using baking powder because it's easier to use. You don't have to get the amounts right with baking powder and baking soda. Some weird recipes use both. They use a little bit of baking soda and a little bit of baking powder, but we're not gonna do that. Okay. Then we're gonna put some. So now we have all of these things in our bowl, and we've mixed it quite well. And looks good to me. Now we're gonna melt some butter. Remember, with butter, just like chocolate, you can't just heat it up in a pan. It needs to do the double boiler method. So you need to put a vessel underneath, put some water in it, put a bowl that's slightly bigger than the vessel, so it stays on top, and then in that bowl on top, which is going to be dry, you put your butter or your chocolate. When you have chocolate compound, you need to melt it down. You use that, and then you heat the water. So when the water boils, it can just the hot water and the steam sort of heats up the butter or the thing without actually just burning it to a crisp. Also, chocolate is really finicky when it comes to heating because even if you get like a drop of water in chocolate, it just ruins everything. Everything just like it just turns into a black mess, and it's really terrible. Like it just goes to waste. So make sure that whenever you're heating, especially with the double boiler method, for chocolate, you never put any water in it. And that's the way the pros do it, and that's something I also prefer to do. But since it is convenient, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the microwave to melt the butter. So here I have a microwave safe bowl. I'm going to put butter. So the recipe that I'm following actually says 100 grams of butter, but the times that I've made this recipe, it actually helps to have a little less butter than the recipe says, because then it gets really just gooey. It's just a gooey mess. So I use about half the amount of butter that they've mentioned. So I'm using 50 grams, but it actually tastes much better with less butter, and this might be the only case when that is true, but it is something. So we're gonna put all of this in the microwave oven. Now this recipe actually is quite simple, and also when you have a chunk of butter, it's best to cut it up into smaller pieces because it helps the heat get to it more evenly. So I'm not even gonna cut it properly. I'm just gonna just slightly smaller pieces. I'm just using a spoon to do that. Yeah, just about the size of a sugar cube. Weird for me to use that analogy because we don't really use sugar cubes where I come from. So yeah. So there's one more thing actually, because we're going to be baking these, and if you're using a microwave oven, mine has a convection thing mode, which is used for baking. So you do need to preheat the oven before you put the cookies in, but I've not done that so far because the microwave, the oven makes a lot of noise, and also because I needed to melt the butter in it as well. So we're gonna do that. Just a few seconds is enough actually to get the heating process started, because you don't want to turn it into brown butter, because then that gives a very different taste. It's like melting sugar versus making it into caramel, sort of like that. So yeah, about 30 seconds should be enough. And we have our melted butter. There are still some chunks in there, but it's fine because we need to just stir it. And once you start stirring it, you can actually melt the butter, because the melted bit is hotter than the non-melted bit. We're also gonna put some, because I don't have parchment paper, so I'm gonna put some butter under the on the tray, on the baking tray. Okay, so the melted butter is almost ready. We just need to mix it a little bit so that all the chunks are also completely molten. I'm just gonna put like a tiny half a teaspoon on the tray. Even though we're cutting down on the amount of butter than as the recipe says, but it's still a very decent amount, so it doesn't matter if we don't butter the tray before, because there's enough butter in the cookies itself, so it doesn't really stick in my experience. You can also use like a spray of butter to coat the bottom. I prefer to use actual butter because it just tastes nice. I'm just gonna wash my hands. So if you talk to any chef, any professional chef, and I'm clearly not one, but I follow a lot of them, so they will always tell you how important it is to remain clean and have a clean kitchen when you're cooking. It helps you stay organized and all of that, you know. So just gonna make sure that the flour mixture that we made is properly done. And now we're going to set the butter aside to cool for a little bit. And ideally you would want to put the sugar and the butter and the egg together, but actually yeah, I'll do that. So the sugar required is also quite a big amount. It's half and a third, so that's around 80% of a cup. So it uses a lot of butter, it uses a lot of sugar. That's not bad, but I'm just saying we also need to be a little healthy, right? So that we can eat more cookies without feeling as guilty about them. So here we have some sugar. I'm gonna put that in the butter that we melted. So because of the tiny amount of heat that's still in the butter, it's gonna start to melt, but it's not gonna completely melt. It's gonna turn into like a sludge of butter and sugar, and I mean, it's the most unhealthy thing you can imagine. It also looks like a snow cone. It looks like ice. It also sounds like ice. So you have to make sure that the butter is not very hot when you add the next ingredient, which is the egg, because this is a thing that happens quite a lot with a lot of people, is that when you add an egg to a hot mixture of butter or milk, it just turns into an omelette basically in your dish, and you don't want that to happen. So what the egg does is it gives structure to the entire thing. It helps combine all of the ingredients together, and it just turns everything into a nice batter the way we need. And so now, yeah, it's not very hot right now, so I'm gonna put the egg in that as well. So you need to open an egg. You need to crack an egg with just one blow. It takes a lot of help. Actually, it's a nice little test to see how good you are to crack an egg with just one hand, the way you see in the movies. And after a lot of practice, I've been able to do that. I wish you could see this, because I'm really proud. And it used to take me a long time to even crack an egg the normal way, and I would still manage to get a lot of shell in it. But with a lot of practice, with a lot of omelets made at home, I've gotten the hang of it. So here again, the egg is also gonna help combine the sugar and the butter together. Again, we've made sure that the butter is not extremely hot. So it's turned into like a slime almost. So we have our butter, egg, sugar mixture, and we're gonna mix it into the flour. So we're gonna make like a small well in the middle of our flour thing. A little difficult to do that with a fork. So we're not gonna put all of it in together at once. We're gonna put about half the mixture and start to combine it. Then we're gonna put the other half to make sure everything is incorporated well. Butter and chocolate together is just the most amazing, the most beautiful thing you can ever see in a kitchen. Just that glistening, glowing brown that you see. Now we're gonna put the rest. Again, this is very so I used granulated sugar. You can use powdered sugar, but I prefer this because again it gives it a nice chunky crispy thing, and also when it's in the oven it's gonna melt a little, so it's not as big a deal. You always start slow because you don't want to over whisk the egg, and you incorporate all the flour on the edge. I can't remember who invented the whisk, but I think it's an incredible invention because it just helps mix things together so well. And I hate the fact that I'm not using one right now. It takes a while for everything to mix together properly, but once it does, you'll have a really nice batter. Like a fairly thick batter. And what I'm going to actually do is I'm going to give it a nice whisk. Make sure all of the flour from the sides of the bowl is incorporated into it well, and it's going to turn into a nice chunky batter, like a nice thick batter. You want to make sure that all of the ingredients that you've added, the butter, the milk, the butter, the eggs, the sugar, the cocoa powder, the baking powder, the flour, everything is mixed together well, like almost homogeneously. Homogeneously. So again, because of the huge amount of butter and the egg that we've put in, it has a very nice luster to it. It's like almost shining. You want to make sure that nothing is stuck to the bowl, and yeah, it's all combined into a really nice mixture. So yeah, it looks good, man. It looks really good. And there we have it. It's a nice batter. It's actually a little thicker than I had the last time. Maybe I used it a touch too much flour in it. So you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna improvise. I'm gonna use just a teaspoon of milk. It's almost like a half a teaspoon of milk. It's just there to help everything mix together properly, and it's going to add a little bit more moisture into our batter, in our cookies. I should really have used a whisk because it gets quite hard and the fork is almost bending in my hands. Do you remember watching Pokemon, and there was this Pokemon called Alakazam, I think, who used to bend spoons because he was a psychic type Pokemon? It was always quite weird, right? Yep, everything is really mixed well. We have a nice batter. So now we're just gonna scoop these on to our baking tray. Before that, we're gonna preheat the oven. So we're gonna preheat at 100 and we're gonna preheat at around 170, 180 degrees. So we're gonna let that happen for another. Yeah. So the way the convection oven works is that it uses heated air. So a microwave actually uses microwaves. These are these really tiny forms of electromagnetic waves that are sent from the coil that's inside the oven and in the microwave oven. And the microwaves actually heat up because of their frequency of the waves. It heats up all the things in the oven chamber. And the way a convection oven works is quite different. It actually uses hot air and it creates these convection currents where the hot air rises from the top, from the center, it rises to the top and it sort of cools a little bit, very slightly, and then it comes back down and it creates almost this sort of a loop, like a vortex inside of the oven because of the heated air. So it takes a long time to preheat the oven because of the hot air, because it's convection and it's just heating up the air and the air is heating up everything inside it. You want to make sure when you're using convection that you don't leave the door open for too long so that the hot air doesn't escape and you can continue and you make sure all the heat stays inside. Now we just have to wait. Till then I'm gonna make sure that the batter is really good, man. So what we can do till the preheating is happening is we can size the cookies. We can see how big we want our cookies to be, and you can actually use a spoon or if you have a scoop like an ice cream scoop, but I'm gonna use my hands again. This entire thing feels like I don't have enough utensils to be baking cookies, but it's also just the fact that, again, the tools don't really matter as long as you have the ingredients right, you have your taste right. So we're gonna turn them into balls, and when it heats up, because there's a lot of butter in it, it's gonna start to melt a little and it's gonna turn into nice cookies. And you want to make sure that there's enough space in between two cookies because it does tend to spread out quite a bit. And again, I love the way these balls look because it's so inviting to see this just dark chocolate, and the amount of butter on top just makes it shine. They're almost like orbs of, divine taste or something. I don't know. Like, chocolate was so decadent and so important that in the Central American civilizations like the Mayan and maybe the other ones as well, they actually used chocolate a lot in a lot of their rituals, and it was like an honor to have chocolate. So only the kings and the royal families were allowed to even have access to chocolate. But also, the cacao, so the cocoa beans actually come from a fruit. It almost looks like a smaller papaya, a really oblong papaya, and it's called the cacao pod. And in that pod you have all of these beans, and they need to be roasted, and then it needs to be um, ground properly to turn into basically chocolate. But those cocoa pods were actually, because they were so important, they were actually used in a lot of rituals. And it also roughly, at least to the Mayans, it roughly looked like the way a human heart was. And maybe I shouldn't be talking about the human heart when doing this, but in a lot of Mayan sacrifices they used to open up the heart of the sacrificial person, and they would hold it up. And later on, I think they started using cacao pods because they looked sort of like a heart, and it was, I mean, you didn't have to kill a person to use it. Also, I mean, cacao is really, really tasty. Like chocolate is much tastier than a human heart, I would presume. So it's getting there. So because I have a smaller baking tray, I've just put 5 of these at once. So we're gonna have to do at least 3 batches, I think. And once I put them in the oven, they're gonna go in for at 180 degrees for around let's say 8 to 9 minutes. Around 8 minutes should be enough, because then if you over bake the cookies, they're gonna turn really solid, and we don't want that because these are gonna turn into really moist, soft cookies. So it's best to take them out a little bit early. And actually, the mixture is so tasty, the batter is so tasty, you can eat it raw because it's basically cookie dough, and it does taste really good. And I am almost having to control my temptation to just eat all of the batter by itself. And again, it's tasty, you can eat it, it's edible, but you shouldn't eat a lot of it because it has a raw egg in it. And eating a raw egg can sometimes make you unhealthy. So almost there, we've been preheating the oven for around 10 minutes. We're just gonna wait for a couple more minutes. I'm just gonna keep rambling on till then. Also, we use granulated sugar, so what it does is it's gonna melt into and it's gonna melt into the cookie, and it's gonna taste sweeter than if we had used powdered sugar. And what's also gonna happen is that it's gonna melt, and it's gonna form like a nice sugar base. So it's gonna be a little hard at the bottom, and it's gonna give a nice crunch at the bottom, and it's gonna have a really soft top and middle. So it actually gives a really nice combination of textures when you eat this cookie. And it is a little delicate, so when it's cooked out, and if you follow my advice and take it out a little bit early, like around 8 minutes, it's gonna be a little bit soft. It's gonna be a little delicate to handle, to even get off the baking tray. But if you can manage to do that properly, and if you do like your cookies to be a little crunchy, you can add a little more flour in it. Or the way you can eat it, the way that I find to be better, is that you can actually, once the cookies are baked, you can put them in the fridge for a little while, and they'll turn solid into like proper chunky cookies. But they also have a very nice texture, and they're quite crumbly and quite nice. I really like this recipe because it's quite simple, it's quite easy. You need very few ingredients. All you need is flour and cocoa powder and sugar and a little bit of baking powder and eggs and butter. So yeah. Also, one more thing that I've been wanting to do is you can actually put some so now, because I've made these in chocolate, you can put some white chocolate chip cookies in the dough. So you could get these nice. And our oven is heated, so we're gonna put our baking tray in. So 180 degrees for around 8 minutes. And now we just wait for it to bake. Once the cookies start baking, also you can smell the cookies, and just the smell of chocolate and just the smell of baking cookies is incredible to fill the house. I also love the smell of baking bread, but I haven't baked bread. ever. Maybe I can try doing that. And our cookies are done. Ooh, they've risen up really well this time. They haven't spread out as much as I had expected. So the next batch, I think I'll press it down a little. It's very, very hot, you guys. Make sure the oven is closed. Okay, I'm gonna get them off and put them in a dish. These are really quite tall. They're very, they almost look like, they're like domes, which I had not expected. I was expecting them to be much more spread out. But as I did mention, the batter this time was a little hard, so it might just be that. Maybe because I used less butter, like even less butter than I did last time. Because the recipe asks for 150 grams. I used 100 grams last time. This time I used only about 75 grams. This next batch we can always improve. That's the part about cooking and baking, is that you get to experiment, and it's things that you eat, so you can tell if something is good or bad. And unlike other things like paintings and other things, where other people's opinions are quite important, they're not the most important thing, but they are still decently important. But cooking is something that you can do for yourself, and you can just cook in your free time, cook for yourself, and then if you like the things that you're baking, you can cook for others. And you can always perfect the recipe as you go along. So this is also an experiment, basically. And you can try out different ways. You can try out using different kinds of ingredients. So again, I'm going to put 5 more cookies to bake. We're going to let them cool down just a tiny bit before we dig into them, to make sure that we don't burn our tongues off. The second batch is ready to go. Again, 180 degrees. For 8 minutes. Our second batch is about almost done. And let's hope that these ones have also perked up, but have also become softer. Hey, these look much nicer. The first ones look like chunks. These ones look like actual cookies. They're a little smaller than I had wanted them to be. They're about the size of a regular cookie, like the one that you would buy off a shelf. These do need to cool down just slightly before you remove them, because they're really delicate. So yeah, these are softer, these are bigger. I think we're gonna have like a big variety in sizes and shapes. These do look good and they smell really nice. Ooh, I'm very happy. And the granulated sugar is still in the cookies, and it's gonna give you a really nice texture when you're eating them, when you bite into them. Time for the last batch now. What if I bake just one massive cookie? No, let's not do that. Let's not be that crazy. So I'm not really consistent with size, but that's sort of the fun of it, is that you can make them as big or as small as you want them to be, versus if you bought cookies from outside and they would all be the same size. And also it looks better. I always find imperfections to be just nicer and more beautiful than to have just perfectly molded cookies or biscuits. What is the difference between biscuits and cookies? I would think it's a largely the America versus like US versus UK issue, but there might also be other issues that maybe like the only thing that I can think of is that which I'm not sure if this is the actual answer, but biscuits are made of batter that is poured into a mold, whereas cookies are just on a flat thing and they just bake into whatever shape they are. But don't quote me on this, I'm gonna cross check that. Time for our third batch. Third and last batch. Now you can experiment with the temperature that you're cooking at and the time that you're cooking for. Like if you cook things a little faster but at a higher temperature, they're gonna be a little crispier on the outside and a little softer like a little raw in the middle. If you bake them at a slower temperature for longer, they're not gonna be as crispy. Maybe it's gonna be more evenly cooked. So yeah, you can experiment with things like that. And that's our last batch. Ooh. Smells incredible every time I open the door. Oof, looks nice. The butter you can hear almost is still gurgling away. Now I'm gonna leave the oven open because I want all the heat to get out because I'm done baking for today. Whew, nice. These ones are a little flatter because I molded them like that. So I'll try to put pictures for the final product. And this is the last cookie. So yeah, we're done. And I've got a nice big tray, like a nice big plate full of cookies, and I'm gonna take pictures. I'm gonna put them in the description, and let me know what you think about these because I have this is something new that I'm trying, and I hope that you like it. If you like it, I can try some new stuff out, maybe some savory things, maybe some desserts. Maybe you can write in the comments what you would like me to cook, and I'll try to make them more interesting, and things that sound nicer. So something maybe that fizzes, or something that smolders, just something that has more texture in its sound. And yeah, the cookies look incredible. I'm gonna have a little bite. This is the first batch because that has considerably cooled down. So here it is. Again, because these are soft cookies, they don't crumble, or they're not as, or they taste really good. Again, because of the sugar, you get like a really nice base at the bottom. It's quite crispy, and the center is still soft, almost like a brownie. I actually like the fact that these have less butter than the last time I cooked, so I can eat more of these. So this is the first episode. It's an experiment, but if you like it, comment in the description. Let me know what you would like me to cook next. I'm hopefully gonna continue with this, and yeah, like, share, subscribe, tell your friends about this, and really try some of this stuff out. I will also try to put the recipes in the description, but try this out, cook, because the only thing that really matters in the world is food. So it's important to make sure that the things that really matter continue on. So have fun, and I hope you like this episode. Bye bye.